I'm not here to shame anybody, but I am here to shine light into the darkness and to be a voice for the children and the women that God has entrusted to me. And to fight for them. They have been silenced in their life, and I have this voice, and so I will use it. And I can tell you, they are worth fighting for. They did not choose it. They were there by force, fraud, or coercion, and they are worth doing the work for. And so we don't have control over everything in life, but we can say that simple yes or that simple no of today, I will not watch this. It's one baby step at a time. Change doesn't happen overnight. It took me years and years to finally get sober. It doesn't happen overnight, but it is done in steps and meant to do alongside of people. And so you can do this. There is hope. And I've seen my life be changed and many other people's lives be changed. So there's hope.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Porn Free Millennial Podcast. I'm your host Mac, and I have Danielle Johnson here from FINED. She's the Director of Partnerships and the training specialist for this very, I think, special business impacting the community of Colorado. I've been looking forward to talking to Danielle for a while, because we're going to be talking about a subject that is going to be tough. It's definitely tough for me. When I initially met Danielle and learned about FINED, it was at a Flatirons church event here in Lafayette, Colorado. That's the church I go to. I think that's a church Danielle goes to as well. It's Flatirons. And this group is an important group. It helps women that have been exploited in the human trafficking industry, or just in general, sexually exploited, helping them reintegrate into society, which I think is really important. And part of, and I'll get to you in a second, Danielle, but just setting the stage, I think something that really struck me was last year, in the winter time, and Flatirons was like, hey, we're going to host this event where FINED's going to be here at our campus. You can come. I think it was in the evening, like during the week. And just the way that you all talked about how the porn industry is a direct pipeline into human trafficking. I've written about it a little bit before, and I've talked about it a little bit, on my podcast. But really, the way that it was described that night, it was something that you just can't forget. You can't ever look at the porn industry the same way again. And also human trafficking, because I think, like we're going to talk about tonight, I think oftentimes we think about human trafficking being in different countries, but it's happening in our own backyard. And this podcast really is to have an open discussion about that. This isn't going to be a place to, shame anybody that has watched porn, right? That my whole podcast, I talk about how I was in that struggle for a really long time. So I definitely know better than anyone, how that shame feels. It's not, what we're here to do, but what we're here to do, and what Danielle is here to do today, is to talk about, the truth and what's going on in this world, and what we need to be aware of when we're consuming porn, and what we need to be aware of just in our communities with human trafficking. So long intro, but Danielle, thank you for being on with me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I look forward to it and just so thankful for all that you're doing.
Yeah, and I just appreciate. I know that you and your organization reached out to you to say, "Hey, would you be willing to come on?" And I'm just so grateful that you all agreed to come on, and that I'm able to help share the impact of the work that you all do with my audience. I think it's gonna be a really great episode. I've been looking for this for a while. So, just to start off, like, how did you get into this? How did you get into this line of work?
So I've been in the anti-trafficking world for over 12 years now. My journey started when I was 24. The Lord opened the door for me to be an overseas missionary. I
Mm,
had the opportunity to travel to 11 different countries in 11 months. And it was on this trip where God really opened up my eyes and broke my heart to the realities of human trafficking. I got to serve in Thailand in the red light district and just saw the darkness that was taking place. I worked in a safe home in Cambodia for little girls who were 3 years old to 13 who were recovered out of human trafficking. I learned these girls' stories and
mm,
just the pure evil that was done to these children. It was earth shattering. Yeah, just realizing that this is going on each and every day all around us. I not only saw the darkness, but I also got to see the power of God and the way He's able to transform and bring healing in this safe house. These little girls were so sweet, despite the evil that they endured. And it was on that trip where God really showed me, this is what I have for you.
mm,
I wasn't sure at the time what that looked like, but coming home to Colorado, I'm born and raised here. He showed me this is happening in your backyard. This is happening in your home. Um, and so he opened the door for me to work and live in a safe house for women coming out of exploitation. I quickly realized that if I wanted to help them with their sexual trauma, I needed to be able to help them with their addiction first. And so I went back to school. I became an addictions counselor so I could help them because oftentimes trauma is paired with addiction. And so
mm.
I wanted to make sure I was able to help the women that were coming into this home as best as possible. I served in the home for 7 years and then decided to step down, where God opened the door for me to work at Refined. And so just really thankful that He has allowed me to continue this work. I'm also a certified trainer for the Colorado Human Trafficking Council, and so have really been able to learn not only what does sex trafficking look like, but also what does labor trafficking look like.
Mm.
Our focus here at Refined is serving those coming out of sexual exploitation, which is a huge issue all around us, but in Colorado as well.
Yeah, and I know that when, because not only did I go that initial session, I did some 2 training sessions afterwards starting this year, which is neat. Looking to get more involved with your organization. I know that when we go through the training, there's a lot of work that you all do to help set the stage with some definition. So, for the audience, like what does it mean, like trafficking, like sex trafficking? Like what exactly does that entail?
Yeah, so when you hear sex trafficking, what you're really looking for is force, fraud, and coercion. However, for a minor, force, fraud, or coercion do not have to take place because a minor cannot consent to exchange their body for money. But force really is as it seems. There's a lot of physical violence that's taking place. We often see forced situations in the gang world. We'll
Mm,
also talk about familial trafficking tonight. And so,
mm,
force is part of familial trafficking. Somebody was born into this, they don't have a choice. But then, what we see more often is that fraud and coercion. So, fraud really is a false promise for a better life.
mm.
Coercion is psychological and emotional manipulation. And so that's what we're seeing more and more often when it comes to bringing in victims. At Refined, we serve those who, yes, have been trafficked and fall in that definition, especially through our court support program. But we also serve those who have come out of exploitation. What we've learned is that a lot of people, even if they fall under that legal umbrella of trafficking, they might not self identify as a trafficking survivor because their pathway to entry. And so
Mm.
maybe it was their family members that were trafficking. Maybe it was a romantic partner. It wasn't how culture made it look. And so they might not say, I was a trafficking victim. We want our services at Refine to be really safe for those receiving them. And so we have changed our language. And so we are partnering with different stabilization homes throughout Colorado, bringing in life skills that are faith-based, but also very much recovery focused. And so we want to give them this big tool belt of skills so that way they're less likely to be vulnerable of being preyed upon again. We also have our continuing care because the reality is just when somebody's recovered from human trafficking, it doesn't mean that they're free. The trauma that they've endured is something that they're going to carry with them for the rest of their life. And so we have our continuing care. So after somebody has gone through the trial process of testifying against their trafficker, after they've gone through the stabilization homes, they have some sobriety and recovery under their belt, but life is still really hard. And many of the women we serve, they lack safe people. And so we invite them into our continuing care where we partner with local counselors so they can continue that therapeutic journey. We do 2 virtual Bible studies every month and quarterly get-togethers, especially during holidays where they are more triggered than other times. And then we also have individual relationships that we call trusted friend mentorship. So that way they have somebody to do life with. And life wasn't meant to do alone. And we just want to make sure as long as that survivor wants us, they have support along the way of recovery.
Yeah, thanks for walking through that. Because I didn't quite know, like, what does Refine do, right? What do these organizations do? And the way that you're explaining it too, it seems like there's a lot of community, right? There's a lot of reintegration. I think something that struck me too, as you're talking now, but also in the trainings and everything, is just their sense of normal, right? It's nowhere compared to like what our sense of normal would be. Can you explain that a little bit, or just, what ages do people typically, maybe we can just talk about the US. I know, like you were saying, being overseas, I mean, it could, in the US too, to start at such an early age. Like, how often does it normally happen with like common, people that have been trafficked that you've interacted with?
I mean, I'm in a different field, and so the people I'm interacting with, there's a very high percentage just because of the nature of my work. But what we're seeing is that it's a lot more common than what most people think. It
Mm,
just looks different than what we grew up thinking. And so there might be people who are being trafficked and exploited that are right in front of us, and we don't recognize it because it's happening in their home. It's happening in their schools. But for a lot of the women that I work with, they might come and are finally able to actually get help when they are a woman in her adult years. But when you learn their story, you realize it happened at a very young age. Everybody's pathway of entry or story is unique, but there are some common factors. And childhood sexual abuse is a huge common thread that leads to vulnerability of being trafficked throughout their life. And so I know one woman, her trafficking started at 1 years old. She was trafficked from 1 to 13. Another woman who's very close to my heart, it started at 4. She was 4 till 56 when she finally was recovered from trafficking. And so it looks different for each person in front of you. I say women, that's because the population we specifically serve are women. We do serve minors in our court support, but right now we don't have the capacity to serve the male victims. That is a population that is being trafficked and underserved.
mm,
And so just when I say women, no, this is not just an issue that is
right.
affecting the female population, but boys and men are also being targeted as well.
Yeah, and we'll get into it a little bit later. We're gonna tie this into the porn industry too. No doubts about that. But I think first too, I think it's setting the stage a little bit just to understand. But you know, what's the scale globally? Because I know. when you've shared some of these numbers with me, it just makes your eyebrows just go up where you're like, what? But can you talk a little bit about just the scale of it, like the
Yeah.
business side of it, just like how big it is?
Yeah, so numbers are really hard in this field because human trafficking is an underground
Yeah.
crime. And so a lot of the numbers we're not seeing come through. But what we do know is human trafficking is the fastest growing criminal activity in the world.
Mm,
There are more slaves today than there are at any point in human trafficking. In Colorado alone, they say we bring in over $62 million in the commercial sex industry. One victim alone can bring in over $300,000 each year for their trafficker, being
mm.
sold in the upwards of 15 to 20 times a day. And so this really is a huge growing problem. And it is growing faster than any other criminal industry. A big part of that is because people are a renewable resource. So you can sell a drug one time. You
Mhm.
can sell a weapon one time, but you can sell a person again and again and again, day after day, year after year. And so this is definitely a growing issue. United States is in the top for both buying and selling of human trafficking victims. And we have a very, very high demand for commercial sex in the United States. We are considered to be both a destination and a source country when it comes to human trafficking.
Wow. And I think Colorado, right, is that's our home state, top 10, right?
Yep. So since 2017, we have continually ranked among the top 10 states. And there's a lot of different reasons for what makes one state more vulnerable than another. But human trafficking is happening in every country, every state, every city, every town. But yes, we do have some of the highest rates right now. And 60% of our trafficking or sex trafficking cases are children.
Wow, 60%. That's nuts. That's really nuts.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, okay, so we're talking about, and I think a lot of people when they think about human trafficking, right? I think they think, I mean, I think how I used to think about it, right, would be like Taken or, what you'd see on the movies, like somebody's um, kidnapped and they're thrown in a trunk, and uh, definitely that happens, I'm sure, right? But I think you were talking about it a little bit too, and I think this is where we could weave in a little bit into the porn industry, but it's not all just, I would say maybe like physical stuff where it, like you were talking about earlier, it could be fraud, coercion, to where, hey, I'm an OnlyFans web girl, or I'm making pornography myself, but I don't really control it. And there's blackmail that's being hung over my head if I don't comply with it. Can you talk? I mean, you said something. Maybe we'll start here. You said something that was, I think I wrote down was, if there wasn't porn, there wouldn't be human trafficking. Uh, and so maybe we could just start there and just unravel that a little bit as we talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So without the demand, there is no human trafficking. Without buyers, traffickers cannot traffic, pimps cannot pimp. And when you think of, okay, well, if demand is the root issue, what is fueling that demand? And pornography is fueling the demand. And so, as with any other substance, pornography is recognized as an official addiction. And so, with addiction, you need more and more of that same thing to have that stimulant. And so, or that dopamine effect. And so, before you may have been able to look at an image and that could have done something in your brain, but over time it starts sensitizing. And so you need more and more of that. Where I genuinely believe, so our greatest demand is middle aged, upper class white men married with
Hmm.
children. Let me be very clear, they are not the only buyers, and we are seeing a huge increase in young boys who are purchasing sex trafficking victims.
Mm,
But that is the most common demand that we are seeing. And I believe when that husband said his I do, and when he held his baby in his hands, he wasn't thinking, one day I'm going to go buy a 13-year-old little girl or little boy. But eventually, you need more and more until you find yourself in this unthinkable place where you're purchasing sex from children who, let me be very clear, they have no choice. They are not selling their bodies. A child cannot traffic themselves. But yes, porn definitely fuels the demand, and demand fuels human trafficking.
And then do you think too that people that are sucked into the trafficking industry, is porn for them like kind of that gateway in to where uh like someone goes into porn and that's like what they think they're getting into, to say, hey, I'm just going to make some videos, maybe it's something I'm doing by myself at first, but then things start to get tacked on to what the demands are from whoever they're working with, and then before you know it, you're in the commercial sex industry and you're selling your body. And maybe you're not even of age, right? Because there was some pretty landmark cases against Pornhub where they had to remove a lot of uh remove, I think it was like close to 90% of their videos, or they were ordered to. And that was I think it was like 2020, 2021. There's a really good book called Takedown that I wrote down on. You can put the link in the podcast description. But actually, Lila McElwain, I don't know if you've ever worked with her, but she has the Justice Defense Fund, and I think that's in Denver or somewhere close there. But really just good work. But she showed basically that for Pornhub, you don't have to, like, they didn't have any age verification on there. Both ways, really. I mean, you could type in your age or whatever to go on, but there was no other way to verify how old you were going on, but also how old you were, or if there was consent. Because I think she in her book wrote, she just tested it out. Like, she just turned on her camera, filmed like her foot or something, and then uploaded it. And there was there was nothing that was really to validate that. So I'm sure that that's a way that people can get sucked in too, to where it seems like it's harmless, and that, hey, I think that's how OnlyFans is sold, and that's how the porn industry is sold, is like, look at so and so, like they make this much money. But that's like the 1% that actually make any money. Most people don't make any money, and then their images are on there for the eternity, basically. So can you talk a little bit about that? You got the demand, which I really understand that, right? Because I think at some point you can see that too with the child stuff too. I mean, you always, when these people get caught, I mean, they just have it's CSAM, right? Is that the proper way to say it? Yeah, CSAM. Probably so YouTube doesn't ban this video. But but yeah, you'll find that on their laptops, right? On their devices, like all the child, pornography, things like that. You can definitely see how if someone's just not satisfied with that, they get numbed out. That's the next step that they're going to take. So it makes sense that that would happen to somebody too that's just watching porn all the time and it's just not enough. So sorry, that was really long, but like on the other side of it too, for the people that get exploited, I'm sure that porn's a pipeline for that too.
Porn is definitely a pipeline. It's not one of the most common pathways that we see that are drawing people into trafficking. Where you might see that is fraud. And so, this false promise for a better life. This young girl or young boy thinks their dream is coming true and they're about to be a model, but then they get there and this modeling agent says, I'll take care of everything for you. You don't worry about this. Like, give me your ID. I'll book your ticket or your flights. And then they find themselves in this place of debt bondage. And so this is a debt that they can never pay back. And now this trafficker has complete control of them. And then they say, you could pay this debt off faster if you take off your shirt. Oh, you took off your shirt. You're never going to be a model. No one's ever going to use you. And this debt just keeps escalating, and they might owe for the photographer, for the plane ride, for the clothes that they were given. And so they thought all their dreams were coming true, but then they find themselves in this place of being exploited and trafficked. Often what we see more than porn being how somebody entered, where it wasn't necessarily they said, I'm going to be a porn star, and then they find themselves being trafficked. What we see more is they were being exploited, and then their traffickers are using porn sites like OnlyFans to exploit and solicit their victims. They will make it look like that individual is posting the content when in reality, somebody else is posting and profiting off. And so that's what we see more
That's a better way to
compared
put it.
to somebody
Yeah.
saying, like, I'm going to choose to do this with my body. And do some people choose to use their bodies? Yes, but there's a lot of different studies out there.
Yeah.
Again, so many statistics, but I've read one where it says 98% of women in the sex industry who say they were there by choice were sexually abused as children.
Mm.
And I've heard, so for years, I went into strip clubs through a ministry called Beloved, just not to shame the women, but just to reach them where they're at. You saw the pain on their faces behind scenes in those dressing rooms. You heard some of their stories. Some were single moms trying to feed their kids and pay their way through schools. Many of them were not the ones that were actually keeping that money. Their boyfriends were. It wasn't something that you saw a lot of choice in. When you think of pornography, the first thing that people say, it's their body, it's their choice.
Right.
But it's very rare that we see somebody actually has a choice. What we see much more of, the way they got to that place was through force, fraud, coercion, and not by, I want to sell my body.
I'm so glad you said that, because that makes so much more sense I think the way I put it initially, and then as you started to say it, it's like, yes, that makes way more sense. So porn's more of that, hey, they're being exploited, and then, hey, here's this other avenue that can be used to hold them there, or really too to make it look like, oh yeah, like this is, like you said, and because that's how it's sold in our culture, really, is, oh yeah, like they love this lifestyle, this is a choice that they made. And I think that's a really important thing to say, to say too, in a way. I think um from my point of view too, just struggling with porn is, did I make the choice willingly? I mean, I was like 10 years old, right? Uh, it started a place of trauma for me too, and I think for a lot of men, and of course women too. But I was just looking at some statistics the other day when I was writing an article, but I think they use the word exposed a lot. And I think it was, typically for young boys, it's like the ages of like 9 to 11. And then girls, it's just a little bit older. That's the average age of exposure. But the word exposed really jumped out to me, when I was thinking about it, because yeah, it's like an exposure. It's not necessarily like, hey, I'm going out of my way. Typically, it just exposes itself to you. I was interviewing a guy the other day that's a little younger than me, and he said he just overheard somebody talking about like a website. So it's not like he went out of his way to like just look up a website. It's like somebody was talking about it and he was exposed to that conversation. Then there's that
Mhm.
curiosity. And then, hey, before you know it, you're right there. So just want to bring that up.
Rewiring your brain and it's drawing you in. And
Yeah,
yeah, like those exposure rates are getting younger and younger. And porn is not what it used to be. What we used to
exactly.
have was considered soft porn, where you would have to intentionally go out and seek this. Now it is intended to find you. It's no longer in a form of a magazine, but there's a lot of different studies out there. And Fight the New Drug is really
Yeah,
great, but there's
they're
things
good.
that show like 60 something percent of teens say they were not looking for porn, but they accidentally stumbled by typing one digit wrong on their
Right.
phone, where it really is intended to find you. Um, yeah, I've seen the exposure rate from 7 to 12 when it comes to porn. Oftentimes people think, well, pornography views is something that just affects boys, but we're seeing girls are struggling with it at an increasing rate too. I saw one study that showed 30% of views are from females.
Yeah.
But what is being seen on porn now is a huge issue, because porn is getting more increasingly dangerous. There's a lot of rape porns. There's dad on daughter, brother on daughter, infancy porn, gang rape porns. The list goes on and on. And what this is doing is it's desensitizing people. We're
Right.
no longer seeing people, but as sexual objects. And so we're seeing rapes and sexual violence and assaults increase, and they are directly correlated with pornography, because kids are going out and they're reenacting what they're seeing on porn, to a real life person. And that's where that issue is. Some people say, well, who cares? It's just a person on the other side of the screen. But you're not raping a person on the other side of the screen. You're finding a real person. And what about that person on the other side of the screen?
Yeah.
They are being used, and abused for other people's pleasure.
Yeah, and I think I think I was telling you a little bit about how it was like one of the things I was sharing. It made it up on a Flatirons sermon, which was crazy to witness that, because they were talking about pornography. It was in that AI series that when they were doing that, but it leads to what you were just saying. I'll repeat this. It was actually an argument I got into with in a sauna at Vasa Fitness. Um, I was wearing this. So this is the thin red line of the Flatirons men wear, that just really symbolizes just living with integrity. And I was in the sauna, and another guy had one on, and we started to talk. And it's going great. And I'm pretty outgoing, and I started to talk about my podcast, and what I write about. And then this guy just kind of walked in, all macho, overheard us talking, and just started to say, like, what's the big deal? It's like practice, like watching like porn. And he's just like, you're not going to go out and, shoot somebody if you're watching like an action movie. And I said, well, wait a minute. I was like, in the action movie, do they actually shoot the other person with the real gun? And he's like, no. I'm like, so if you're watching porn, are they like actually having sex? Yes, like they're actually doing the act. It's not like, and I think you talked about this is a really important point. It used to be with like softcore porn, right? Would be, maybe they're not actually having sex. They're simulating it, right? Like it looks like it, but it's not actually happening. When you watch porn, it's actually happening. Like they're doing the thing, right? And then when you watch hardcore porn, like when you might actually be watching somebody rape somebody. Odds are you probably are, right? Watching rape happen, and it's very violent, and like choking and all this stuff. It's terrible. And as a young boy watching that, right? That's terrible. Or a young girl watching that. Now, the other thing, right, is that while you're watching people doing it, you're also simulating it, by masturbating. Like you're involved in this, right? So that's what I told this guy. And that's what kind of made it onto the sermon would be, hey, it would be like you were watching a video of somebody getting actually shot with a gun while you're shooting a gun at something. Or maybe like you shoot like an animal, or you shoot something while someone else is being shot on TV and killed. You're doing the same thing. That's going to change your brain.
Right.
That's going to change the way you look at people.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of people that would draw that line of saying, like, well, if I saw this physically happening and a child being raped or a woman being raped by 10 men, like, absolutely, that's not okay. But then when you're watching it on a screen, all of a sudden, it's okay. But in reality, it's when you watch, you are saying to the trafficker, I will watch this. I'm going to demand this. And that means they're going to continue to abuse and continue to provide because there's viewers, there is demand. And
Yeah.
whether it's behind a screen or not, that abuse is happening. But we tend to justify it because it's not a physical body in front of us.
Yeah, and the crazy thing too is this conversation was happening with an AI ethicist. So we were like talking about just art, like AI porn, and he was just sharing that there has to be something real to go off of, right? So it's not victimless even in that regard. But what we're talking about is just it's real porn. So like it's very clear line that this is a real person that likely could be getting raped, or it's non-consensual, or even if it is, are they really there by choice? Like there's so many things that are not verified,
Right.
but we've been so desensitized to where you can just get to that with a click of the button, and there's not really you don't think there's a consequence. There definitely is a consequence. I found out, not like I never really got into that stuff, thank God. But yeah, there was times where I think I was watching porn and I was like, that was kind of weird. Like I didn't like that didn't make me like that was, not normally what I would watch. And that can put you in a deep sense of shame too, I think, as a user, to where I think eventually, right? And we're talking about some heavy stuff, right? So I definitely want people to know, like, listening, like, as a Christian, right? Repent, go to Christ, be cleaned. Don't let that sink you into this place where you feel like there's no way I can be forgiven for that, because you can, right? But it's also important to know that this is happening, right? Like, this is real stuff. And I think, at least for me, when I think about it that way, it does break down a lot of, old temptations that I might have. Or, like, you talk about addiction counseling where you have like a trigger or something, which I've always found for me with porn, it's like this an emotional need. If I'm feeling that need of, like, I don't feel valued, or, I don't feel confident, if I get rejected, there's a lot of emotional needs that happen with addiction, to where you're looking to fill that need. Like, you're looking for that solution. You're just going to a place that found its way into your life at an early age, where it's saying, "Hey, I'm the solution. I'm going to help you." And in some sense, when you're younger, it does feel like that. Like, it feels like that escape, or like that, "Hey, like, I feel better, or I feel at least like I don't feel the pain right now." But what you find out, I think, as you get older, and your brain starts to mature a little bit, and you start to get into relationships and all that, you start to realize, what, this really wasn't helping me at all. It was actually hurting me. And then you start to realize it's actually an industry that's built off the hurt of other people.
Mhm.
And
Absolutely.
I want to add
Mm.
something. So this is and I was looking for this while we were talking, this study that I talked about, and I think it was two podcasts ago, but it's on PubMed. It's National Library of Medicine. Looks like it was in 2024, Effects of Pornography on Youth, a Review. And I talked about this a little bit. I think it was two podcasts ago, but and that podcast is called "A Girl Down the Street." I was talking about how I was addicted to porn before I even had my first kiss in eighth grade, with my neighborhood, a girl in the neighborhood, which is just nuts. And I think that weaves into what we're talking about, right? Is kids are being trafficked even before they're having their first relationship, which is just heartbreaking. But the one thing about the demand I wanted to add in really quick. So it says in 2023, Pornhub totaled over 2.14 billion, with a B, billion, visits during a single month. Month. More than Instagram, Netflix, Pinterest, and TikTok combined. 28,000 people visit porn websites every second. Every second.
Every second. Yeah. They say over 21,000 views on the dark web of child sexual abuse is happening every single day. And I think with addiction, pornography addiction, drug, alcohol addiction, um, it thrives in isolation. And so I don't have a history of struggling with pornography addiction, but I do with drugs and alcohol.
Mm,
And I know when you're in that addictive state, you're in a sense of isolation and shame, and you think you're the only person. And so, if you are somebody out there that's struggling, find community. This is a huge issue. You just said some really, really big numbers. You are not alone.
right.
Join a support group, because if we don't start making changes, if we don't start helping ourselves and getting connected with healthy people, human trafficking is going to continue to grow, and our children are going to continue to be at risk. And our relationships with people are going
Yeah.
to continue to suffer as well.
Yeah, and Danielle, can you talk a little bit too about just the growing trend in, I think, and I shared some of these videos on Substack that we watched. I think one of them was that Bark, I think that company, where I think one of the women that works for the company, she went undercover, as a young I think initially, wasn't it like she initially was like a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old, and then they dropped the age down even lower on her profile. And
Yeah, absolutely. So
yeah,
human
talk about that a bit.
trafficking is shifting. And so
Yeah.
traffickers are really strategic. So human traffic, online sexual abuse has increased by over 85% since 2020.
Wow.
And so um, traffickers are realizing I don't have to have a direct connection to this child in order to target them. They say that there's over 80 million fake Facebook pages alone that are used by perpetrators to target victims. And so our trends really are shifting, and traffickers and abusers are using online platforms, gaming systems, TikTok, social media. Um, to target and lure their victims. And so, one of the greatest trends that we see today impacting our children and our youth is called sextortion. And so,
Mm.
this is where a perpetrator is going to meet somebody online. They're often pretending to be somebody that they're not. They're using pictures, they're starting to build some rapport and relationship. We've seen this happen within an hour, or sometimes they will be grooming their victim over a period of time. They're learning details about that child. Where do they live? Where do they go to school? Then, once they have this trust and relationship, they're saying, "Hey, don't you care about me? Send me a picture if you want to make me happy. I'll
Mm.
send you one first. This is our little secret." Once they've gained that image of that child, then the exploitation starts. And now they say, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to expose you. I'm going to send these pictures to your parents. I will ruin your family's identity. I'm going to blast them throughout your school. They often know where they live. They might even use threats of, I'm going to harm a loved one if you don't do what I say. Somehow they gain this control over, and so this is coercion happening. They're
Mm.
psychologically and emotionally manipulating this child to gain control over them. And so there's a great video called Oblivious. It takes place in Colorado, and it's really showing the sextortion. This now perpetrator is trafficking this 13-year-old little girl among other or young children as well. And so she's doing this. She's exchanging her body for him to not do what he's threatening to do. And so you also see that in pornography, where they didn't intend for this image or this video to be seen or spread. They thought they were sharing it with a cute young boy or a cute young girl. And instead, behind that screen was a gross old perpetrator preying upon this child. And so, sextortion is a huge way that traffickers are luring their victims. No matter where I go to speak, it can be in a small mountain town, it can be in a city, it can be in a group of 10, in a group of 600. I have yet to not have somebody come up and tell me about their child's experience being preyed upon through online platforms, or a child themselves. I spoke in a youth group. I had 3 young girls come up and tell me how they were being sextorted and abused. And so this really is growing, and it's affecting kids all around. They say 1 in 10 kids are at risk of being preyed upon online. And so, yes, watching videos like the Bark video, Oblivious, is so important for parents to recognize just how quickly those threats are out there. We need to be talking to our community, to our children, early and often, to show them the realities of the danger behind these platforms.
And what's like the average age when that starts to happen typically?
So, like you mentioned in that Bark video, the younger that mom got in her profile, the more they were approaching her. But they say the average entry into sex trafficking through online luring is between 15 and 17.
Mm.
And so that doesn't mean the abuse is only happening in that age, but that's where the most often requests to meet in person and where they are now being recruited in. But there is a lot of abuse that's happening at younger ages as well.
It makes sense too, right? Because, okay, so we're talking about a few different things. We're talking about the desensitization of culture, which I mean, if someone said that our culture's not being desensitized through our, through porn or just through overall, I think, use of social media and like just how addicted we are to our phones, I think that person, I'd just be like, I'd just call them a liar. It's like you're not being honest or you're oblivious, right? That word. So we're talking about desensitization, but then also, right? I just think that we've all seen this that I think kids are getting onto devices at a younger age. I know there's this huge thing. There was this interview I actually listened to with Chris Hansen, where I mean he's been just huge. That's the To Catch a Predator show. But I think he was talking about, and I haven't watched it yet, but I think they did a documentary on, was it Roblox, or I think that's what it was called. I think that's one of those games that kids can play online, and just how kids are being groomed online there. And then I'm trying to remember the other ones too, but there's a ton of different that I've picked up, I think, just being in this space, writing about it and just, listening to podcasts that are more geared towards it. It's just about like any social media platform or, place where kids can play games online. That's where these predators are going to prey on them, which
And
is
with
just
that
amazing.
online space, it's traffickers are realizing, oh, my victims are just a click away
Right.
for a buyer. And so, yeah, it's definitely shifting where traffickers are finding their victims online, but buyers, the demand, are
Mm.
finding their victims online now too. And so there's definitely a shift.
Do most buyers, do they feel like they don't do a lot of the trafficking themselves? Is it more they go through somebody to have like that line of defense if, that person gets caught or whatnot, to be like one, I guess, 1 degree separated?
Yeah, so typically you're going to have your trafficker. Those are going to be the ones profiting off of the body of a child or of their victim. And then you're going to have the buyer. And so the buyer is fueling the demand, and the trafficker is supplying the victim. And the victim is the one being abused in the middle. The victim is the one that is not profiting off of anything. And so
Right.
she or he's in the middle of our demand and our supplier. And so typically you're going to have your buyers. Often they are going to be buying their victims on their lunch breaks, on their way into work, on their way home from work. We've been on for almost an hour, and there's been countless children who have been sold and abused since we've been on. And so this is happening all hours of the day. It's also very rare for a buyer just to purchase a child or a victim one time. This is
Mhm.
something that they're going to do again and again. And we see that often that same buyer is buying that same victim again and again, sometimes each and every single day. And one buyer tends to have multiple victims that they are buying, and traffickers tend to have multiple victims that they are trafficking.
Yeah, and it's something too that I think you've said you've been pretty much doing this for 12 years, right? Been in this. Do you think that just things have exploded, or the trend of the volume of it is because of just the internet, social media, because it just makes it so much more accessible to reach?
Yeah, absolutely. Where there's less risk when you just have to do a couple clicks. It's really easy. It's at people's fingertips. Um, in that Oblivious video I mentioned, you can see the buyer had said, like, do you have anyone younger? He clicked in a few
Mm.
things, and then all these different ads came up where he could be serviced in moments. And so the accessibility has just grown so much with our modern day technology advances.
Yeah, and as you're talking about this, I mean, I talk about this all the time with porn, right? But it's like the three A's. You got accessibility, you got anonymity, and then you got affordability, to where porn's like free basically.
Right.
And then it's like, okay, well, that's the stage, so you can stay there, which I
Right.
think a lot of people do. But then it's like the affordability part. That's like, okay, well, what if I want more than that? So it makes a lot of sense, because I think even with porn, and I've talked to people from different generations, a lot of my mentors are guys in their 60s that, just talk about how things have changed so much. But I think there's also been a cultural switch with it too, because it's always been around. I think, prostitution, right? They say is like the oldest occupation in the world. I think that's like what the quote is. And then really with pornography, it's been around forever too. But I think, if you talk to somebody maybe from a different decade, like the boomer generation or whatnot, they might think about porn in a different way to where it's like, oh yeah, like that was gross, or like we look down upon that. And I think it's still there, but it's just been so normalized now to where it's almost like now like a joke, like, oh, don't let my girlfriend get my phone, or, I gotta delete my history. And it's more like you could like you listen to, like, sometimes I listen to comedy podcasts or whatever, and it'll just be like every episode at least at some point. I kind of stopped listening to them because they just talk about like porn in such like a joking way. But then they all kind of end up saying like, yeah, like it's not really good for me, you know, but it's
Right.
still like a joke of like, just watching it, or it's just been so normalized. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It's like so normalized, decentralized, or desensitized, and decentralized when you think about it, right? Just because you used to have to go somewhere, you used to have to risk being publicly shamed potentially. Like if you bumped into your pastor, if you're at the grocery store and you're in the magazine aisle and you grab one of like, a magazine that's a little bit, risque, and you bump into your pastor in the grocery store, that's a risk right there, or to somebody that you know. But, if you can just be in the parking lot, and you can just look on your phone, uh, or order a child, nobody knows.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing too I've talked about with different addictions too. Like, if I was drunk right now, you'd know. I'd be slurring my words. I'd be looking different. If I was high or whatever, like you could tell physically, verbally, all that stuff. But I think like with porn, with this, how can you really tell? It's hard. It's hard to really know. Versus, I think that's why sometimes people push back on addictions. They're like, well, porn's not like that. It has to be something that you like ingest or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, can somebody be addicted to gambling? Yeah. Can somebody be addicted to shopping? Yeah. Like, and I really like, I don't know if do you follow Gabor Mate at all?
Love him.
Yeah, he has such a good quote about addiction too, because I think
Mm-hmm.
anytime someone just kind of pushes back to me about it,
What was
um,
it?
yeah, let me see if
Stop
I can.
asking why the addiction and start asking why the pain.
Yeah, it's that. And then he talks about how, oh, let me see. Okay, here I got it. Okay, so that is a quote from him, and that's a great one too, because that really gets the heart of it, right? Is it's the pain. That's the driver of it. For
Mhm.
me, it was never really about the naked women. It was just I was in pain, and that's just where I found a source of relief, to myself, right? But what he says about addiction is any behavior that a person finds relief and therefore craves in the short term, but suffers negative consequences in the long term and doesn't give up despite the negative consequences. And I think, and that can happen too, right? With this addiction, I think, to like sex. That was something too that I picked up as well. I think learning more about my relationship with porn is, I think sex addiction is a little bit different. I think when you're addicted to porn, it's almost like it's more isolating, to where it's more inward. And sex
Mhm.
addiction is kind of like more like you still feel isolated, but it's like an outward action. But I feel like with porn, like you're talking about, it can be that gateway to where the inward just doesn't become enough, to feed you what you're craving. So then it has to be more outward. And then if you're already isolated, right, and you're already in this state of, I'd say, shame, then you're probably going to go through this with an unhealthy approach. And if that's all that you've been modeling your expectations off of, and I think maybe we can talk about this too a little bit, Danielle, with porn. is I think porn sets up this expectation of control, right? Because when you watch porn, it's very much geared towards the male, what the male wants to see, the male gaze. Very much so, right? The woman's always doing what the man wants, is always looking to please the man. It's very much coming from the male point of view. And I think, that affected me when I was growing up, just with my relationships. I feel like I just had like a shorter fuse. I didn't really take what women said that seriously sometimes. Like I wasn't even that interested. Um,
Mhm.
Especially if a woman wasn't really attractive to me, I just really wouldn't care. Like what are you gonna do for me?
Mhm.
But it's just crazy to think about it that way because like I was raised well. I have great parents, great family. But it still affected me in the way that I really wasn't even aware of it until crap hit the fan in my marriage. And I was like, wow, like I'm really behind with my emotional intelligence. So maybe talk about that a little bit too.
Absolutely. And I think like a lot of times we don't give enough credit to the effects of things and our choices that they
Mm,
have, one, in our own lives, but two, that they have on others. And so yeah, oftentimes we think like, I'm going to do this and it's not going to impact me. But if most people don't just watch porn one time, they're watching it again and again, and sometimes for hours a day,
yep,
late
that was
into
me.
the night.
Yep,
And they're doing it day after day. And so that is going to impact you. It's going to change the way that you see other people. That's going to change the way that you see women. It's going to change the way that you see the world. The music that we listen to is going to have an impact on how we view the world. I listened to music that I was listening to as a child, and I had no idea what it was saying then. I
yeah,
just thought it was a fun song, and now I listen to it, and my heart just hurts that my
yeah.
little girl self enjoyed that when it's
Mm,
talking about abusing women.
big time.
And now I recognize, but I had no idea, even not just pornography, but the shows that are out there that
Sure.
are just celebrating sex. It's showing kids, oh, this is what's expected of me, and this is just what's normal. And it's
Mm,
putting this expectation, well, if I ever want to be cared for, I'm going to have to do that, even if it doesn't feel right or puts them in this place of discomfort. And so it definitely affects how we live, how we see things. And then it does have that greater effect of, is my choice causing harm to somebody, even if they're not in front of me, even if I don't ever have to see them, even if I'm not one of those ones that are going out and buying a child or buying a woman or a boy. Me watching that is increasing and fueling the demand. Me watching this is going to continue to have traffickers supply human trafficking victims. The suppliers are going to continue to put children in these rape situations online because people are watching them. And
mm,
so, and then it goes into other things like you mentioned your marriage.
yeah.
Pornography addiction is one of the leading causes of divorce in our country. And so it definitely affects so much more than we are willing to admit because we want to sit in that isolation saying, this is my choice, this is my problem. It's the only one that it's impacting is me. But it does have a ripple effect, and each one of our choices does affect something.
Yeah, gosh. Yeah, well said. And it, I think too, we just think about, you were talking about the US and just how, we're like right up there with, I think you said the supply and the demand, right? And then you just look at our culture, right? And just like you were saying, and I remember too, right? I was thinking about it. Like I loved listening to that rap. Yeah, I was born in 91. So like when I was in high school, I think it was, I think I graduated like 2009 or something. I grew up in Colorado too. And Colorado's got kind of a white state, but I definitely thought I was kind of like a gangster at some point. But what that was really was like the whole pimps and hoes thing, right? Like that was huge, and
Mhm.
I mean, I just look back on that and I listen to the music and I'm just like, wow. Like the beats, some of the beats of these songs are still great. Like there's some really good beats, but then you listen to the lyrics and you're just like, these are terrible lyrics.
Mhm.
Like these are just like the worst things. And they do talk about just treating women so terribly,
Mhm.
profiting off of them, being a pimp was just like the coolest thing. And now it's like I just am like, well, no wonder we're in this mess. Like no wonder Colorado tried to make prostitution legal. No wonder, right? Because it's almost like you wake up to it. And I hope that this podcast wakes somebody up because you got to wake up. It's here. It's real. It's happening. It's you have kids, you need to protect them, and you can't be afraid of it. You can't be afraid of having those conversations. I think that was a thing too that probably for my parents, they just didn't really know. Like they just weren't really aware. But I think at this point in time, there's no excuse. I have empathy, really. Like I'm not mad at my parents because really, like the dial-up internet started, like I still remember it. You probably do too. Like I still remember I grew up in a house where I don't think I even had a cell phone until I sophomore, junior year of high school, and when I did, it was like one of those indestructible, Razor, Motorola phones or Nokias, right? But that was still a time I think when the internet was developing. I remember when I was looking for porn, it took a while. I had to be like super sneaky about it. And even if I did, it was like pixels. Like it was not high quality stuff, I think, but it was so addicting and stuff. Like I still wanted to find it,
Mhm.
once I got hooked to it. But now we just live in such a different world to where it is so dang accessible and it's not like you're trying to watch someone naked on like a scene in the movie. It's like you can just access like the most hardcore stuff. And I would say even like too, like I make it a point, and I think for listeners too, that you're struggling, like just stay off like the shorts, stay off anything that's like reels, like where you're just if you swipe it's a video because I've felt like times like where I've kind of felt like tempted is like if I ever go into like YouTube shorts or anything like that, because every once in a while, you'll just be swiping through. Even if you make a good algorithm, all that, there'll just be something that's like provocative. And it's not even like it's porn, right? But it's just a really attractive woman. She's talking to you like it's almost like porn. And it's just like a workout video or something there to where even just about every aspect of life, every product you could buy. Like even if you watch like a commercial, I sometimes laugh. I don't really watch TV, but if I'm like watching with my parents and there's like a chocolate commercial and it's like the sensuous voice, it's just
Mhm.
like, can
Yeah.
you guys just back off and just get like
Yeah.
it's always like sex sells. And it's like, yeah, it does, but that's not
Right.
good.
Sex sells, mental illness sells, depression, anxiety, those are
Yeah.
all correlated.
But it's like a
Where
cultural bag of and it just seems like as we've been talking, right, like it's so tied together, and I think like you talked about too, the trauma, it starts early. Maybe we can shift back a little bit there, with just talking more, like focusing more, I think, on the people that have been exploited. So we probably talked about it a little bit, but maybe just some things like what do you think like people's like biggest like misconceptions are, just about human trafficking?
Yeah, so I think often when people think of human trafficking, they think this is another country's problem, but this
Right.
doesn't actually happen here. But as we've talked about tonight, this is a us problem. It's happening all around us. Oftentimes, people will think, well, it's an abduction, but most cases are where a child or a victim is being trafficked by someone that they know. And so this is familial trafficking. And so it might be a parent, it might be a friend, a coach, a romantic partner that they were once in a mutual conceptual relationship, but then it shifted. We see a lot of, so human trafficking is not a crime that discriminates. You can be of any socioeconomic status, any age, and be targeted. But there are things that increase your vulnerabilities. And so your age alone, being a youth and a teenager, that is going to increase your vulnerability. Being a college student, especially one who travels out of state for college, you're increasing your vulnerabilities. Anyone with access to online platforms increases the vulnerabilities. And so I think when people think of trafficking, they think that's never going to affect me and that's not going to affect my children. But this is truly an us problem. And it doesn't look like what we think. If you were to Google human trafficking, some of the images that are going to pop up, people have tape on their mouth, they're handcuffed and chained, locked in these hidden rooms, but that's rarely what it looks like. Traffickers look like you and me. Buyers look like you and me, and victims look like you and me, and they are walking around us. We just don't recognize it. And so it's not like the movie Taken. That is 1% of the cases. And so it's often a dad selling their child to their friends, or an extended family member, a grandpa. Sometimes it's a really, really sick and addicted mom exchanging her child to support her drug addiction. Sometimes it's somebody that has been molested their whole life and now they're really sick with an addiction. They didn't choose this. They're selling themselves to support their drug addiction because of that pain that we talked about. And so instead of judging somebody thinking, oh, they are just doing this because they want to, we really want to peel back the layers and see, how did they get there? Because no child thinks, when I grow up, I want my body to be exchanged for sex for money. There's just a lot of times we just think like, oh, it doesn't impact me, but really it is all around us.
And when it comes to the familial, is it typically, what's typically the motive? Is it mainly just to make more money? Just monetary? Is that typically the main driver behind that? Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like money is always going to be a main driver behind a lot of sin areas in life. When I was overseas and working in anti-trafficking, I saw, especially in Thailand, little boys and little girls were being raised, and they knew what their future was going to be. I worked in this school and taught English as a secondary language, and I saw these little boys who were being raised to act like females because in Thailand, lady boys they're going to sell for hire. You saw this desperation of poverty, and so in order to feed their families, this is what they knew. And so there was this desperation that led parents to selling their children. Here, I work with many women who it was their parents, and their parents weren't necessarily doing it for this money, but they were so sick and deep in their addiction that they were exchanging their child's body for a drug. When you're that sick, you're not able to make good decisions. Sometimes it's not that the parent was selling their children, but they're so sick in their addiction that they're letting really unsafe and toxic people around their child. But a lot of times it was this knowing decision. I am going to sell my child. I'm going to first abuse them myself, and then I'm going to sell them to my friends, and then that gets out. One survivor I know, she's just doing absolutely amazing things, but her dad sold her throughout Colorado. And there was a very big demand for this child, and
Wow.
it's not uncommon. Oftentimes, these people are prominent people in communities, and so we would never think of them as somebody that could do such an awful thing. We have seen so much come out with teachers. Oftentimes, I hear people say, well, how could that coach, how could that teacher, how could that pastor do something like that?
Right.
And we have to stop asking, how could they do that, and start recognizing they got in that position so they would have access to children. Foster care kids, runaways, they're highly vulnerable and at risk. And Colorado, we do have some of the highest runaway rates. They say 1 in 3 runaways will be approached by a perpetrator within the first 48 hours of running away. And so our runaways are very, very vulnerable, and traffickers are strategic. They know what to look for. They're meeting these victims' needs, whether it's emotional needs, needs for love, needs for food, shelter, and they're saying, I will take care of you. They're not saying, hey, come with me, and then they instantly traffic them. They build this trust and they take care of them. And now this child or this victim feels this sense of obligation that they owe them. And so it is, yeah, look, it's so complex and it's really hard to understand. I've been in it for 12 years and I'm still learning each and every day. And everybody's story is unique, but I have yet to meet one person saying, this is the life I would have chosen, and I willingly got to where I'm at. And porn has been a way that many of them were solicited and sold. Never once in my 12 years have I met somebody that said, I wanted to sell my body, and this is where I ended up.
Mm. Hmm. Kind of takes your breath away just listening to that stuff. I think that's a huge thing. Hopefully a takeaway as people are listening, right? Is like, these are people, these are human beings. Uh, I think it always just breaks my heart just a bit when I see that online sometimes. It could be maybe in response to something I post or just discussions where I think men they just say such vile things about women, calling them sluts, all these things. And I think the more that the more healing I've done in my life, with this addiction I had with porn, the more close I've gotten to God, with my faith, right? You see people as people, you see them as human beings. And it helps you realize just how wrong it is to participate in this, because you're participating in the objectification of somebody, which I think sometimes people can just throw that word around and be like, okay, well, how big of a deal is that really? And it's like, it's a really big deal. It's a huge deal, and it's wrong. It's wrong to do that. Everybody created by God is special. We're all made in his image and likeness, right? All of us. And I think a lot of these people that go through this, there's a lot of pain there. And I was just thinking about too, as you're talking about it, like if, someone being trafficked by their parent, uh, how hard that is. But then also, I think how hard that is to realize, like, my parents did this to me. Not just that, like what they actually went through in their life, like physically, but just the mental component psychologically, to be like, I feel like and that's why your work is so just I just think I think the world of what you all do, because when I think of that, right, and a woman going through that, like, that's a lot. That's so much to, like, how do you get back? How do you get back to, because, like, hey, I grew up, loving household, all of that, able to go to college, get a job. Yeah, I don't have a criminal record. Never had any trouble with that, right? And these women, like, that's how their life starts. And maybe you could talk about that a bit too, is typically, right, women that are involved in this, like, they end up getting a criminal record, or they end up, picking up these addictions to where when it comes to, hey, they get rescued, like they're, someone helps them, like your organization comes in. It's not like that's just the end of it. There's a whole nother life that they have to build up. Maybe talk about that a bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of different barriers that survivors face, and each individual, their story looks different. People ask, well, did the addiction come before the trafficking, or did the trafficking come before the addiction? And different people's stories are different. Survival sex is a pathway of entry where they were in crisis already before, and then that exploitation happened. Some they were introduced by their trafficker as a means to control them. But it's very rare that somebody is just in a place of being forced to sell their bodies
Mm,
for the gain of somebody else, but they're often being expected to do other criminal activities.
mm,
And so when a woman would come into the safe house, or when Refined is partnering with a woman, there's often many things that she's working through. One, there's lack of education. It's not
right.
very often where they've had the opportunity to graduate high school. They say when abuse starts, and for a lot of our population, that was in their young years, your brain stops developing. And so our culture expects them to be behaving as an adult, but their brain is still very much stuck in this state when the trauma and when the abuse started.
Mm,
Um, with again, like, is the chicken or the egg first? Were they born with mental illness, or did this severe compounding trauma have a very, very big lasting effect on their brain? And now they have mental illness. A lot of them have a lot of physical
mm,
disabilities because of the trauma that they weren't born with, but because that abuse happened at such young ages, that's a lifetime effect. But yeah, so poverty, lack of education, lack of social skills. They've been isolated. They've only been able to engage with their trafficker, with the buyers, the demand, and with other victims. And so there's a lot of limitations and challenges that they have. And we see that even those 2 years in that stabilization home, it doesn't get them to what a lot of people's norm or expectations of them would be. But what jobs are they able to get? Because there's theft, there's crimes against people, sometimes there's prostitution charges on there, but there's a lot of different limitations. And then they also are able to always healthily work through triggers. And so there's that addiction piece of they're trying to maintain sobriety, but life is really hard. They're living in poverty. And so, yeah, it is a very vicious cycle. And like I said in the beginning, once somebody's recovered from human trafficking, the effects of trafficking does not stop there. This is something that continues with them through life. I have worked with many women, and I've seen a lot of women um, die much earlier than they should
mm,
because the trauma was so severe, and they just couldn't get through this life without numbing it. And
mm,
so they were sober for a while, and then they relapse and OD, where they have flashbacks. They have a lot of anxiety, paranoia. They live in fear constantly
mm.
that their trafficker is going to find them. And so there are a lot of ongoing challenges and effects: mental illness, addiction, poverty, and then lack of opportunities are a few of them.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about it too, just thinking about how could they ever, it'd be so hard for them to look at men the same way, right? To trust men. Because again, yeah, like it's such a high rate of men that look at porn in the first place. So then you're starting there. And I know, I think you all have shared some stories, right? Some victories with women, you know, but just thinking of that and just how hard it would be, if that's how you grew up, let's say your dad uh, was the one that trafficked you and sold your body to other people, and Or, I mean, let's go deeper, right? Your relationship with God. Because I think, right, a lot of times as growing up as a Christian, you see uh, God reflected in your parents. That's typically like the first way that you kind of have a gauge, for, who is God? You look at your parents, right? You look at your community, and if that's all that you've seen growing up is this terrible world, uh, because and maybe we could get into that a little bit too, just how faith plays a role in recovery for them. But I know in my life and in my addiction, I mean, if I was to tell anybody, if you had like one word solution for addiction, would be Jesus. Jesus is love, and but I don't think I ever would have really connected with that if I didn't have community. If I didn't have other people, because I even on an island, uh, even I still believe in Christ. I was raised Catholic, but without people modeling it and showing me and you know, being empathetic, and just listening, being there, being present. And I think that's like a lot of the services you all have too, is just being present for them when they go to court, being there for community events. That's the way that we show God to them. But yeah, maybe a little bit of that, some of the victories that you've seen, or just how faith plays a role in it for people.
Yeah, a lot of people, they've been really hurt, not just by their abusers, but by the church.
Yeah.
They went
Okay. Yeah.
to get help, and um, often the church, we do a really good job at opening our doors to people in crisis, but we don't always do a good job at opening our arms or knowing how to help. And so I think just being trained, being aware, in how what this really looks like is really important for the body. But a lot of the women I work with, they say, like, Jesus was a last resort. I tried everything else and nothing worked. And so here I am. We are nobody is required to be a believer to receive our services. And we are not shoving Jesus down anybody's throat, but we want to make sure we're being people of our words and we're showing them something different by how we treat them, how we talk to them, how we show up for them. How we continue to show up. We don't just show up one time with a meal in this curriculum. We don't just meet them at court one time. We're building rapport with them and relationships, and we are showing up for them again and again and again. There's women that have been in my life for over 10 years, and
Wow.
they will continue to be in my life as long as they want me to be in their life. And so when you're in this, you really want to just recognize these people have been hurt by the very people that should have been protecting them the most. They have no reason to trust you or to let you in. And if somebody that has come from this type of trauma and abuse lets you in, what an honor and what a privilege. And it is a gift.
Amen.
I got into this field because I wanted to help change lives. I wanted God to take my pain and turn it into purpose. But what He has done in my life through the women that and the children that I've been able to serve, He's blessed me so much. They have taught me so much about Him. I hope I get to shine His light for them, but they
Yeah.
have taught me so much about the goodness and the faithfulness and the transformative power of Jesus, and just how gentle He is, and how gracious. He never gives up on us, and He never leaves us. And so I have just learned so much about humanity, about people, about love, kindness, and about Jesus through the incredible people that He's placed in front of me.
Isn't it? I was thinking about that the other day. Just that's the beauty of it all, I think, is in these dark places. That's where Christ shines the brightest, right?
Mhm.
Because I think that's probably a question you get a lot. Is just like, hey, where is their hope? Because and I think I get that question too when I talk about porn, and we went over the statistics of like how many people are watching it and all this stuff, but that's the hope right there, right? Is that even in the darkest times, the darkness that happens in people's lives, when Jesus comes into it and they accept it, it's got to be the most beautiful thing that you ever witness is seeing Christ move in somebody's life.
Absolutely. I think one of, yeah, seeing Jesus come into somebody's life, and like, God doesn't have to use us. We're messy, broken people, and oftentimes we make many mistakes along the way,
Yeah.
and He could have just done it better. I think of, I'm a mom, and I think like my kids, them helping me is not often actually helpful, but it's so good for them.
Right.
And that's how it is with God. Like, we mess up, we're not actually helpful, but He uses us because it transforms us
Mm,
too. And I just think of the people that I've worked with that are the most successful. And it's, yes, they have allowed God into their lives to heal those broken places, but it's also they've invited people in when we try to do life on our own and when we push people away and saying, I've got this, I don't need you. We fall back into our own ways. But when they say, yes, I need a tribe of people, and they call and say, hey, I'm struggling and I want to use today, I want to watch porn today. And you have somebody to speak truth over you, to speak life over you. Those are the ones that are successful because they're recognizing, like, God gave me these people so I don't have to do this alone. It's too
mm,
hard for me to do alone. Those are the ones that have that long victory and that continued recovery because they're utilizing the people in their life. Where life is too hard for us to do on our own. So find those trusted people. They say it takes 7 truths to combat one lie.
mm,
And the world speaks lies over us all day, every day. Find somebody in your life and say, tell me 7 things that are true about me. Because sometimes we can't find those things about ourselves. And so find somebody that will speak truth and life over you. And then repeat them over yourself again and again until you've made it past that trigger, until you start to believe it about yourselves. Because the devil, he doesn't want us. He wants us weak and in a place that we will continue to just live for ourselves.
mm. That's so well said. Yeah, and I think sin described to me by one of my guests was just hurt. It's hurt. When we sin, it's not just we're hurting ourselves. We're hurting somebody else, and I think it's when that builds up, right? And we don't have the outlet of repentance and grace. I think that's where it can get really dark, when it and I knew that in my life, when it built up really, I found myself in places I never thought I was, I think I told you when I was down in Cartagena, I never thought I'd be there, you know, and I was. And it was because of this, I just didn't face what was inside of me. So when I think you talk about that, I never engaged in it personally, but I was still there, and I've talked about that on the podcast a little bit. I know I talked to you about it, but I think that's why, with God in my life, I feel the conviction to be involved and to talk about this stuff, because I think if it was somebody like me that was raised in a good family and all this stuff, and I still found myself there somehow, that could be anybody, in my opinion, and now how do you not find yourself in that situation? Well, it's you don't believe the lies that are inside your head, right? You have, like you said, people in your life that are speaking the truth, where you're surrounded in a community. And I would say, again, I'm not shoving Christianity down anyone's throat either, but I mean, what a beautiful community Flatirons has been for me. And just having Bible study for about 7 years now, but just having good friends, having my little brother and I, we do daily accountability calls every day. So we keep each other accountable. We talk through things, right? He's a addiction counselor as well, and I think the amazing thing about Christ, though, I mean, I was just reading, it's on the plane ride, I was reading a few things, but I was reading through Acts, and they were talking about Saul, you know, and just, that later became Paul, but really just how, I mean, he was leading the persecution of Christians, after the death of Christ. And he was, fervent in that, almost like it was crazy. And then God met him on the road of Damascus. Jesus did, right? And he became blind, and then he got baptized. And I guess the way I thought about that in my life, and maybe for listeners, right, is if you were a part of something like we were talking about with porn, like you're part of the demand. That doesn't mean that you're not a part of God's plan, you know? But it does take realizing and like listening and being open to that, keeping your ears open and to listen to God and God to say, hey, I want to use you and I want to use you. And oftentimes it is in the places where you sin the most. I've found with God. It's like, oh, okay. I
Yep.
struggle with porn. Okay, well, here I am talking about it. And I think
Mhm.
I just think it's an amazing thing about God and about Christ is he finds like what is that thing or what is that pain, as you're talking about the people that have been exploited. That pain can also be turned into something just so inspiring and beautiful, and it can change lives. I think that's what the Holy Spirit does, right?
Mhm.
It's not like you just put your hand on someone, they're healed. Um,
Absolutely.
maybe it could happen, right? It did
Not for
happen in the
me.
Bible, but hasn't happened yet. We did it one time in college. My buddy tore his ACL, and one of those church guys ran up and like put his hands on his knee and started to pray. My buddy's like, "Get off of me!" So not like that, but just your story,
Yeah.
your growth, like where people, I'm sure
Yeah.
people, if they saw you, Danielle, like where you were at before where you said you were struggling with some stuff and like where you're at now and like what you're doing and like God being a part of that, you know, and that's, I think, the beautiful thing about what we're talking about today is even though there's this just horrendous evil stuff, there's going to be good that's going to come out of it when people, are like yourself are out there and you're looking to help other people and you have community there, you have a place where people can go. And I know with law enforcement, I know there's a lot happening there where brave people are going in and they're rescuing people, doing that. There's a lot of different things, right? Do you feel like at least in Colorado, I know you all partner with that too, but with law enforcement, right? Is that typically where you find like the justice for this is like where it's a physical apprehension, or is a lot of it like when they catch someone online and they're able to like show up and like arrest them? Like just curious, like how does that typically happen?
I mean, there's a lot of areas that we do really well in, and there's a lot of areas that we don't. And unfortunately, with most of human trafficking, it goes undetected. They say the average life expectancy of a child victim is only 7 years.
Wow.
And so most kids go undetected, they're not discovered. And even a lot of the women that I worked with, they attempted to get help as a child, but they weren't believed. Their voices weren't heard.
Mm,
Um, and they were just continued to be put back into this abusive situation. And then they learned to just stay quiet. And so by
mm,
the time they were finally able to come and get help, they were adult women, deemed no longer profitable and exchanged for a younger model. And so a lot of times justice is not seen. Our state, we are partnering with law enforcement, incredible organizations like From Silence to Save, who is paving the way for political change.
mm,
In our state right now, there's very little accountability for buyers, the people that are fueling this demand, the people that are purchasing children in our state. They're currently eligible for 6 months probation when they are paying for sex with a child. Our language is not up to date, but praise the Lord, these bills are moving forward now. All that's left with SB 15, which shows children are victims. And if you pay for sex with a child victim, there will be a real consequence. And so growth is taking place. But unfortunately, a lot of times what is happening is the victims are being abused, it's going undetected, and we are oblivious to what's going on around us. And so it takes things like this, people raising their voices, people saying, you know what, I'm in control of me. And I'm going to start being a part of the solution and no longer the problem. We as a community have to wake up. We have to recognize that this is happening, and there are truly more slaves today than there has been at any point in history. And so, are what we doing helping decrease this, or are what we doing helping fuel this? But yeah, most people, it goes undetected, and most victims are not getting the help that they need, whether they've tried to get help or not. And so, yeah, we have a lot of room to grow in this area, but there are amazing people doing amazing things, and we're talking about it, and that's huge. And so I have a lot of hope. Parents are starting to recognize, oh, this does happen here, and what can I do to learn? But
Do you think for parents, like if there's any parents listening, because it's alarming, right? Just hearing this stuff. Is it typically the awareness is more just oversight with online activity is a good starting place for parents with just protecting their children?
yeah, I think talking to our kids early and often is really important. Yes, that online oversight, letting them know of the threats that are out there when it comes to online platforms. But also, I've heard friends say, I'm a boy mom. I don't have to worry the same way. Yes, you do. And
Yeah,
we need to talk to our boys, and we need to talk to them about pornography.
yeah,
Um, we need to show them that this isn't natural, this isn't God's plan, that this is harmful, not just for you, but the person on the other side of that screen. We need to create this place of safety. We need to show our young boys how they should be treating women,
hmm,
and changing and breaking those cycles. We need to talk to our girls, showing them, hey, this is how you should be treated. And if anybody doesn't treat you that way, they are not worthy of you or your time. Um, but we actively need to be fighting against what culture is telling our young children. And we actively need to be speaking truth over them so that way they know their worth and their value. Um, and that they don't have to do these things in order to be accepted by a boy.
right.
And and so it's those conversations on all levels. It's making sure we know, who are they hanging out with? What are they doing with their time? Where are they going? Um, they say that parents back in our days growing up, they weren't there because they were always working. But now they'll show these memes of, now parents, we might be physically there, but we're not there because our face is in
Right.
our phone and we're distracted. We need to put
Totally.
the distractions down and be present for our kids and for the people in front of us. I don't go out to eat often, but boy, when I do, I'm just shocked. Like, people are just on their phone instead of interacting with the person in front of them. We need to be present. So if something is going on with somebody, we're able to notice that something's not okay. But yeah, online detection, talking to them early and often, just being present, training yourself, because traffickers, they're training themselves, perpetrators, they're training themselves. So we absolutely need to be training ourselves on how to defend our loved ones and ourselves.
Yeah, and I think a big thing that sticks out to me, right, is or maybe a few things is like if you're a dad that's watching porn all the time, I think your kid's gonna see right through it.
Yeah.
Because I think kids are super perceptive, and
Mm-hmm.
I used to college summers. Me and one of my best friends were camp counselors, just for like the local one of the middle schools and for the city. And the kids, they'll tell you anything. They'll
Yeah.
be like, "You're ugly" or something. They'll just say whatever's on their mind,
Brutally
and you're
honest.
like, "Oh my gosh, dude." But also, if you're kind of BSing them a little bit, they'll be like, "You're not telling the truth." I think kids like really pick up on stuff, and I think if you're a man, if you're a dad, and you have a porn addiction, and then you're talking to your son about it and about how you should treat women with respect, all this stuff. I don't know. Is your kid gonna buy it? I don't think so. I think about that. I think about when I'm a dad. I really want to be one. I want to be walking in the truth, and walking the walk and say, this is how you treat women.
Mhm.
Because I would be doing a disservice to my son or my daughter, right? And I think that's a huge thing. It goes on the parents big time, right? I think like and me too, I'm not a parent, but like I need to be a role model. We all need to be role models in a way. And like you hit the nail on the head, it's not just porn, it's just this overall culture of just disengagement from being a human being. We are desensitizing ourselves to humanity every
Yeah,
day.
right.
Every day we are just with and it's not all like sin and evil. Like, yeah, you can go on your phone a bit or whatever, right? But like you said, the more desensitized we are, the more detached we are, I think the less perceptive we are.
Mhm.
And that's when you get into this space of just being like, yeah, it's not a big deal. Or like, I'm a boy mom, or boys will be boys. But as you're talking, I'm like, okay, well, let's just say the young boys are watching porn, which they are, which is fueling the demand for child sex trafficking, which is normally girls. So is it like the young boys are almost fueling the trafficking for their counterparts at such a young age without even knowing it?
Mhm.
And I just think that's incredibly evil. I think that's Satan's design. This is straight from the devil himself. I mean, I just think that that shouldn't be how young kids grow up in this world, you know? And no wonder people feel, I think, so nihilistic sometimes just thinking about. And I think that's why some people don't want to have kids,
Right. Yeah,
It's just like, I don't want to raise kids in this world.
totally.
But then that's also on the flip side, like we're talking about hope is will be part of the change then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Be someone like you that's getting involved, right? That's talking about this, that's working with women. And if it's not that, at least if you're listening, like share the podcast. I'm going to share some videos as well. The Oblivious video, I think the Bark video in there. I think there was another one too that was called Boys, I think, which was more,
Yeah.
was that? I haven't watched it yet, but I have it written down. I do want to watch that one.
So
Because I think,
boys is where men come forward and they share their story, which you don't always get to hear. They say
right.
the average female comes forward at 53 about the abuse
Wow.
sexually that she endured as a child. They say the average boy never comes forward. And so it's not that boys aren't being abused. It's not that boys aren't being trafficked. It's they're just a lot less likely to come forward and share about that experience
Mm,
compared to females. There's a lot of shame when
right.
you've been sexually abused. And often guys feel like, well, I should have been able to protect myself. And so it's not a crime that children want to be associated with. Only 1% of the time when a child comes forward about being sexually abused is it a false allegation. And so if your child or another kid comes forward about it, no, that took them so much courage and bravery to do that. Believe them. When we don't believe them and instead justify, oh, that coach, he never could do that. That boy, no way. We're silencing them and we're telling them, I don't believe you. And instead, I believe the person that hurt you. And so we need to be quick to believe instead of justifying the person. And a lot of times victims they attempt to get help and instead they were silenced and they weren't believed. And so yeah, if it's not something they want to be associated with. But yeah, this video, boys, it's great because there are courageous men coming forward and sharing their experiences, which you don't often get to hear. But this is a crime that is affecting both girls and boys alike.
Yeah, and I mean, probably remiss if we didn't talk just really briefly about the whole Epstein situation too. I mean, when you think about that and how multiple administrations have just not done anything, and then finally there's legislation passed, and of course the people that pass the legislation are being attacked, and being, I think there's a primary right now actually for Thomas Massey, who is one of the people that passed the bill. He's being heavily primaried against. I think part of it because of, he was one of the people that led this effort to get this codified into law, to be like, we need to get this released. And if there are parts that are redacted, like, we have to know, Congress, why, right? And when you talk about it, right, it's people in business and in music, all these industries, powerful people
Yeah.
that were involved in this stuff. I
Mhm.
mean, I
Yeah.
went on a dark rabbit hole on the Gmail thing because that's where you can actually access Jeffrey Epstein's email. Kind of wish I
Mhm.
didn't. But heck, like, it just gave me kind of an insight into, like, which is kind of wild. I mean, we talked about this whole thing, but it, like, gives you an insight into, like, how this pedophile, but he was also very connected
Yeah.
with
He's what we
just,
call a finesse pimp.
yeah, just like he was a part of so many of these deals, brokering all these things. He might have been involved with intelligence. I mean,
Right.
this won't be the rabbit hole podcast, but I just think that it's a little bit of the cherry on top of just how connected all this stuff can be, right? Of how widespread is even these most powerful people in industry, or even Prince were involved in this stuff. Even potentially presidents,
Yeah.
allegedly, right?
We're
Uh,
all broken people, no matter what our title is.
yeah, yeah,
I think with
yeah,
Epstein, like you just see this continue desensitizing people where it's
right.
been so dragged out where now people are not, they don't care anymore. They're like, okay, that's old news. And also just life is so hard where you hear people say like I can't handle one more thing, and I
Right.
get that. We can't change everything, we can't know everything about everything, we're not meant to, but there are little things that we can do to make a
Amen.
difference. And but yeah, it's, I feel like the devil weighs us down so much where it's like these really big things that are so huge and so dark. We're like, we just can't. It's self-preservation mode regularly.
Yeah, and that's where, and I think we're almost at 2 hours, so we can kind of land soon. But
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that that's where it strikes back to, start with you. I think if you're a man or a woman that struggles with porn, start with yourself, and reach out, community, like you were saying earlier, was so important. Talk to people, raise your hand, say, hey, I'm struggling with this. Because part of it too, which I always tell people, is, hey, you have a conscience. That's great. You feel guilt about it. That's good. Like, you should, like, that's a good thing. That means that you have goodness in you. Because I think what porn does, it can numb us out. But if you reach out for help, that's great. Like, that's good. It's very good, right? But when we start working on ourselves and healing, and we work with other people, and we have some mentors, we have community. And I'm just speaking from personal experience, right? It starts to open your eyes to where, hey, now I'm talking to you about this stuff on my podcast. That's what I kind of see in my life. Like, I wouldn't be doing this right now if I wasn't working to heal myself and strengthen my connection with Jesus. And I think when you strengthen your connection with Jesus, you start wanting to serve other people. And I think that's maybe, and I'll let you have the final word on it, but I think that's, in a way, when we talk about how things can be so disheartening. Well, what if, right? You can just help one person out. What if? It's totally possible. And that's doing God's work. That's making a difference there. Is start with yourself first, but then, like you said, it's happening in families, it's happening in schools. You haven't been to one place yet where it hasn't happened to somebody. So our odds are in your neighborhood somewhere, but, like, you can be an impact. But how can you be an impact if you're under that spell still? you know so it's kind of break the spell first, and then your eyes will be more open to be a light for other people. But I'll pass it over to you. It was so nice having you on. It was such a treat.
The last thing I'll close with is I'm not here to shame anybody, but I am here to shine light into the darkness and to be a voice for the children and the women that God has entrusted to me. And to fight for them. They have been silenced in their life, and I have this voice, and so I will use it. And I can tell you, they are worth fighting for. They did not choose it. They were there by force, fraud, or coercion, and they are worth doing the work for. And so we don't have control over everything in life, but we can say that simple yes or that simple no of today, I will not watch this. It's one baby step at a time. Change doesn't happen overnight. It took me years and years to finally get sober. It doesn't happen overnight, but it is done in steps and meant to do alongside of people. And so you can do this. There is hope. And I've seen my life be changed and many other people's lives be changed. So there's hope. And just thank you, Mac, so much for what you're doing. Thank you for taking your pain and turning it into purpose and using your voice to shine light into the darkness. It's just been a privilege to be here with you, and just so thankful. Men really do have a unique opportunity to use their voices, especially in this arena. And so thanks for using your voice.
Yeah, thank you, Danielle. And one more question. Would you be open to praying us out?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, cool.
Heavenly Father, Lord, we just thank you for this time together. Lord, we thank you for bringing both of us out of darkness and addiction and bringing us into just your mighty goodness and love and transformative power. Lord, we just pray for all of our listeners out there. Lord, we pray that they feel encouraged. Lord, we pray that they feel empowered. Lord, we pray that you just use this in their lives to bring them out of pain and bring them into purpose, Jesus. Lord, we lift up all of the victims of sexual exploitation and trafficking, Lord, and we do pray for freedom. Lord, we pray that we get to be a part of a time of change, Lord, and we just thank you that you are shining your light in this dark world, Lord, and we just pray for the captives to be set free, Lord, and help us to just die to ourselves daily and just be a culture that does good on your behalf, Lord, and not to be desensitized and just walking through this life numb. You have given us this life, and it is a gift, and it's hard, Lord, but thank you. We don't have to do it on our own. And so we just pray for hope and for peace and for freedom. In your mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Great prayer.
Oh, thanks. Well, thank you so much, and I hope you
Yeah.
have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Danielle. And everyone,
All right.
thank you for listening, and keep fighting the good fight.